Okay, here I've got another fly that you probably don't know about. And this is an old one, but I've been kind of on a string of some of these older flies that people these days aren't necessarily familiar with. And this one is a pretty cool little stonefly pattern from John Barr. This is called a Barr stone, and this fly I think was commercially available in the 90s, and has since been discontinued and replaced. But gosh, a super simple little stone, and sort of the trademark of John Barr is that little shellback, and this is the way he originally tied a lot of this stuff. And this is one of the first flies I ever saw John tie in person, and I was just blown away by some of the cool techniques he used. So I'll show you how to tie this one. It's not a hard fly, and uses pretty commonly available materials. John's a pretty creative guy, so he's kind of gone about this a couple different ways, and I'll show you what he does. So I'm going to pull that guy out and chuck another hooking device here. So what I've got here is a Tiemco 200R, and this is a size 6. You can tie the 6, 8, 10, whatever sizes you want to tie them in. And I'm going to take this is 15 thousandths, 15 or 20 thousandths lead wire, and I want to weight this pretty good. So I'm going to cover the shank with this smaller lead wire, and part of the reason for the smaller wire is it just doesn't create so much bulk on the hook. You can, this is a little fatter fly, but by the time, if you put 25 thousandths lead on there, it's going to make the fly significantly chunkier. So I'm going to use that thinner wire just to kind of maintain the small diameter of the hook shank. And I'll break those ends off. And then I'll start my thread here, just up behind the eye. Let me show you the thread. This is just 8/0 dark brown. So I'll start that thread just behind the eye, build a little thread dam up to the diameter of the lead, and come all the way back down to the bend. Once I get there, I'll build a little thread dam coming back up, and then I'll just cross hatch that lead a couple times. That's just to smooth it off a little bit, anchor everything in place so nothing moves later. Now I'm going to come just a little further down the bend. I want to sort of use some of the bend of this hook to help place the tail. Now, one of the things I find on these bigger 200Rs is if you reposition the hooking device for the Biot portion of our program, it makes the bend a little more accessible. So what I'm going to use for the tails are just some brown Goose Biots. And I'm going to pick 2 of these. I really do have 2. Yep. Like so. And what I do to oppose these, so those are both as they came off the feather curving down, I'm going to turn my hand over and grab one, turn my hand back over and place it back to back so that they're opposed. And you can see the tips are not even. I'll just take those and kind of slide them back and forth in my fingers until I get them to where they're even. And I want, maybe just a little short of half a shank is what I'm shooting for there. And I'll place these on either side of the hook bend, just slightly toward me, let my thread square them up, and then anchor them tightly in place just right up to the back of the lead, and I can cut those butt ends off. So we've got a nice little split tail on there. Now I can chuck that hook straight in the vise again, and I'm going to grab a piece of 3X Tippet material. This is just 3X nylon Tippet. And I'm going to tie this in. I'll catch it here on the far side of the hook, about midway or more forward on the hook, and I'm going to wrap back over it all the way to the base of the tail. But I want it to stay along the far side of the hook. And I'll just clip that back out of my way back here. Now the shellback on this fly is a very exotic material. I've got a couple different pieces here. I'll show you here. This is not very commonly available, and you probably don't have any laying around, so you should probably come to the shop and buy some, but it is the Ziplock bag. Nothing fancy there. I think this one had beads in it, which is a slightly heavier mill plastic than conventional bags, but a regular Ziplock bag will work just fine. And what I've done here is I've cut sort of a tapered strip, like so, and just using a long bladed pair of scissors. And what I want to do is ultimately at the thick end, I want it about as wide as the gap of the hook and then just tapering down. But this skinny end is maybe even a little too skinny, which is all part of the plan. So I'm going to tie this in about midpoint on the hook. And the trick to this is I'm going to bring a soft wrap over it and let it buckle around the hook shank. And I have to kind of gauge where it lines up with the bend, because I don't want it too fat back here at the bend because the fly will be skinnier there. And then as I wrap back, I want to keep that buckle so that material is sort of cupped around the hook shank there. Looks like we've got maybe a little too much light there. That might be a little better for you. Yeah, there you go. All right, so now we get to the cool part. Excuse me, and I've talked about this before. John Barr is the first guy I saw do this direct dub technique, and honestly, I don't see a lot of other guys do it in general. But this is a way to use a coarse dubbing to build a big body on a fly very quickly, rather than twisting all the dubbing onto the thread at once. We can build a fat-bodied fly with a synthetic dubbing, and what I've got here is Nature Spirit Emergence dubbing. That's just pheasant tail color, kind of a brown. We're tying a brown stone. But what I'll do here is I'm going to take the clump and I'll just twist one end of it down tight onto the thread. And you've got to kind of work to get it started tight. But I'm holding on to the clump. And what I'll do is just start wrapping. And I'll kind of start to angle back toward the hook bend. And as I wrap, that dubbing will twist around the thread. And you can kind of, I'm trying to do this all up on the screen, but you can kind of feed out more thread as you go and allow that dubbing. It goes on really shaggy, but it builds that big body very quickly. If you get it to start to come apart, you can kind of give it another little twist. And I want to dub up to about, I'd say 60-70%. And then I'll pull that extra dubbing off. And I can kind of clean that up a little bit. So you can see how shaggy that body is. And I don't really worry too much about that being too shaggy. You'll see here when we're all said and done what we're going to do. And that's going to become a non-issue. But what I just did is built that big fat body in no time. Didn't take near as long as trying to twist that dubbing individually onto the thread. So now I'm going to grab a hen feather. This is a hen saddle feather. And this one happens to be a Hebert, just a natural brown. But you want a long hen feather. The little India hens are probably too short to do this move with. We want a hen feather that's got some length to it. And what I'll do here is I'm going to pull the fluff off the bottom and just create a bare spot on the stem there. You can leave the fluff down here. I actually like to leave that so that I can use it as a handle. And I'm going to tie the feather in by the tip. So I'm going to create a separation point, like so, at the tip end. And you guys are looking at the inside of the feather. So I'm going to tie this in just in front of that dubbing and even overlap up onto the dubbing just slightly. And anchor that down good and tight. And then trim that tip end out. Then I'll come in with some more dubbing. And I'll repeat the abdomen process the same way. I'm just going to kind of get this dubbing twisted down, and I'll just start wrapping. Let that dubbing twist around the thread. And I want to go from just behind our index point, kind of up into the thorax here. And you can see this dubbing, it's super buggy. You can see where this would apply to a leech or, so much stuff that people are using dubbing loops for today. You can accomplish the same thing much faster with this direct dub technique. About like so. Now, one of the things with this shaggy dubbing is you want to make sure that you've built up as much volume in the thorax as you had in the abdomen, and I think we did. Because that dubbing will compact. Now I'm going to take my hen feather and I'm going to fold it. So what I'll do there is I'm going to close my fingers in front of the feather and draw those fibers back to one side. And I'll start to wrap it. I'm just going to get 2 or 3 turns here, so I kind of want these at a steep angle. And by using the butt end of the feather, if it starts to twist, I can kind of realign it. And I want 3 turns across the bottom is really what I'm shooting for here. I've got another half turn here at the front, and what I'll end up with is bare stem at my tie-off. So I can tie off over that bare stem, and I don't have a lot of bulk there. Trim that tip out. And then I'll use my dubbing brush here just to kind of loosen up those fibers. So now I'm going to part these fibers down to the sides. You don't have to be exact by any means. But I'm going to pull that plastic up over the top of the fly. So I'm going to pull that up and kind of buckle it around the hook and take a soft turn and pinch it down just behind the eye and then anchor it tightly. You want to make several good tight wraps there. And I can trim that plastic out. It'll have a little stub. You can actually see that very clearly there. Leave a little stub. Now I'm going to anchor that down. Just smooth that off a bit. Now I want to pull all that hackle sort of forward. I'm going to pick up my monofilament and I'm going to start to rib the body. And I like to rib this good and tight. And tightly spaced turns, kind of getting bigger as I come forward. You can see as it drags that dubbing up on the near side, I'll just sweep that back down as I continue to turn. So these segments are getting slightly bigger as I come forward, right up to the back of the hackle. And I'm pulling that down good and tight. You can see that makes nice deep segmentations in there. Now I'm going to divide the wing case now in half. So I'm going to sort of angle my mono forward through that hackle. And you don't want to try not to catch too much of it. And I'll get a wrap right through the center and then pull that down good and tight to make a distinct segment. And then that front segment I'm going to divide in half again. You can see you can just kind of maneuver the mono through the hackle to create those segments. And then I'll tie off the mono at the front end, and I want to, again, make sure that's anchored down good and tight. And I'll trim that out of there. Then I'm going to build a nice smooth thread head. And whip finish. Be sure to catch that one single strand of hackle in there just to show everybody. All right, now we want to make sure everything's square on top of the hook, and I think we are. Kind of brush that hackle out to the sides. Now I'm going to take a brown, this is a Copic marker. This is copper colored, and I'm going to run this down the plastic and color that shellback. Now somebody will say, can you use scudback or something like that? Of course you can. Scudback was sort of invented to take the place of these little pieces of Ziplock bag that we're using. But this was from back in the day before then. And scudback doesn't quite have the shine that this stuff does. So I'm just going to color this in like so. And then I'll use a black marker to just sort of, kind of draw some stripes, model it up a little bit. You don't have to get too fancy here. Up the center of the wing cases, down either side, like so. And then we'll give them one little shot of heads. Well, actually, let's not head cement them yet because we're going to pick them out a little bit. So you can come in with a piece of Velcro and sort of shag the belly of this fly out a bit. You can see I was kind of sweeping all toward the center so that I'm not screwing up my hackle legs. but I've created a really nice little translucent body. Now, one thing I usually do is I'll come in here and kind of shape this abdomen. I leave the thorax long, but I'll shape that abdomen a little bit just to maintain that taper that we worked on. Like so. And if you really wanted to get fancy, you could come in and peel some of these legs off the bottom or trim them out right down the center, like you might do a dry fly, just leaving those legs sticking out the sides like that. But I don't know that that's necessary. And then we'll give him that little shot of head cement we promised. Get that anchored all the way around. And that, my friends, is a Barr stone. Obviously, you could tie this in golden. Really, all the same materials. I'd use gold-colored Biots, but I'd still use that same kind of natural brown-colored hen saddle. Same mono, same plastic, just a different colored dubbing. But really, a pretty realistic little stonefly pattern that's not hard to tie. You know, it uses, what, 4 materials? 5 materials? Biot, mono, plastic, dubbing, hackle, 5 materials, most of which you probably got laying around. And if you don't, you could always, go to charlieslybox.com and pick some out. But there's my my old school fly of the day. This is John Barr's stone. I hope you guys enjoyed that one. That was kind of fun to pull out of the archives. And I'm going to I tied a couple kind of warm it up. I'm going to put these in my box. I'll fish these again this year. This is kind of a cool one. And not the same thing as everybody else. Maybe a little more compelling than a Pat's rubber leg, huh? I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for watching, guys. I'm Charlie Craven.